Okay guys, let's see this interesting topic is how to find the so-called hidden sound of a limiter, an audio limiter. So to do this, we're going to use this test. It is called Null test. So here I have the song.
Despierto pleno y completo, no hay ningún temor y siento un fuego ardiendo.
All right. So to do this null test, I'm going to create a copy, an exact copy of the same file. It's exactly the same file. We have the same levels. And look what happens if I invert the polarity, or in this case, they call it phase invert, but it's the polarity. And so what I'm doing is adding two signals which are exactly the same. So I have my original file here and I changed the polarity, and then I have the copy without any further effect right now. So if I do this and I hit play, let me unmute both will be playing together. So we can see that we have two exact signals, but they are opposite, so they cancel out each other and we have nothing at the output. If I bypass this polarity inversion and I hear both of them adding together, and actually we can see that they have a pretty high level because they are summing up. So if I apply the polarity inversion again, then they will cancel out. And we hear nothing, we have anything here. So this is the null test. What happens if I change, for example, my copy, I change it maybe just a half of dB or a little bit, the level, let's see. So we can see that we have no cancellation again. I need to set it to 0 dB, so it will be exactly the same and they will cancel out. So this gives us a very useful tool, because this means that if I change a file somehow, I can do this test and find what is changing between one file and the other. So to do that, I'm going to start with this generic limiter. This is the limiter that comes in Logic Pro. So, but you can do it with any kind of plugin. So in this case, if I start my limiter, I'm using the default settings. So let's hear it. In this case, even though my limiter is active, it's canceling everything. But if I start with a little gain, let's say maybe half dB, let's see what happens. We start having a little sound, all right? So we are getting some gain reduction, and so now we have a little difference between the file 1 and the file 2, and so that's what we are listening to. Let me increase the gain a little bit more, perhaps maybe 3 dB. Now we hear, and that's the effect of my limiter. Now I have to do something here. I need to compensate my output level because, of course, now the copy has 3 dB of gain, so it's louder. So I need to compensate that. I'm going to reduce my 3 dB of gain. I'm going to compensate that. And so in this case, I will be able to listen to the difference between the original and the limited version. And there you go. That's the difference between the original file and the limited version. So as we can hear, it has this, kind of pumping. And this is cool because I can now adjust, for example, my release to be, to go with the beat of the song. For example, maybe something like that. I can hear that if I set my release slower, it sounds different, right? But also, if I set my release in a faster setting, look, now we can hear distortion. That's why we should be careful with really fast release times, because they will introduce distortion to our signal. And there you go, you can hear the distortion, which is not entirely bad because that's part of the sound of this limiter. So the important point here is to notice that our limiter is creating distortion and we can manipulate that with our release control. Look. And I'm only, using 3 dB of gain. It's a very subtle gain. Now, for example, let's hear the whole thing. For example, I'd like to use a release that goes with the rhythm. Something like that. I'm listening to the transients of the sound. And I like those transients. Now, let's mute the original one so I can hear my limited version alone. There we have it. I'm going to bypass it. Okay, without limiting. And with the limiter engaged. It's kind of subtle, the change, but it is there. So that's the sound of this limiter, but let's try with another one. I'm going to bypass this one. I'm going to use another one that's comes from Ozone. It's another very useful tool for mastering. And this is the Maximizer. It's a limiter that comes in Ozone. And so let's try it with the same settings. I'm using this case, let's see. Let's start the plugin. Those harmonics we are hearing are added to our sound. So we have to be careful with these processors because they are adding harmonic content, even if they look like they are not doing anything. So we have to be careful here. Now I'm going to use pretty much the same idea like I used with the other plugin. I'm going to use a gain of 3 dB. In this case, I'm going to lower this threshold 3 dB, so it will be pretty much the same. And I'm going to compensate my output for 3 dB as well. So now I can compare both plugins. And so let me take this away. So that's the sound of this limiter. If I want to hear this in a whole context, I have to mute the original one, so I am listening to the copy only. There you go. Without compression. I have a bypass here in the plugin itself, so I'm going to use that one. Alright, now there are some limiters like this one that you may have different release modes, and it's interesting. It's like changing your limiter. Look, if I change to the mode 2, number 2, it sounds different. Look. This mode creates another kind of distortion. It's different than using the IRC1. And so I can adjust the time here, make it slower or faster, and I will have different kind of distortion. And of course you can tune this in order to get some kind of sound and experiment to see which one works best with your signal, with your audio. Like this. So now you can compare, for example, this plugin with the other limiter. Both are doing pretty much the same, but they sound different, right? So I'm going to use the first one that has some kind of sound. I'm going to bypass that and activate the other one. And of course, it will sound different. That's why we should be careful when limiting too much. If I go for a very aggressive limiting, maybe 8 dBs or so, well, let's compensate. and you are adding all that distortion to your signal. That may be good, that may be bad, it's up to you, but you need to know what you are doing, and so now you can do this null test to find these hidden sounds in your processors.